to Bright Spots. I am Dr. Fred Douglass Smith Jr., Professor of Public Theology and Director of the Center for Public Theology at Houston Graduate School of Theology. I know that's a lot of theologies. Today we have a special guest, one of my colleagues at Houston Graduate School of Theology, Dr. Douglas Kennard, a professor of New Testament and many other things as well. He's going to be with us for the next 3 shows to really talk about his work and how it relates, to our public witness and what we do in our society today. So why don't you tell us something about yourself, Dr. Kennard?
All right. Well, I've been at Houston Graduate School now for 9 years. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, I was chair of biblical studies at another school, Bryan College, and prior to that, for 15 years, I was involved in the Bible and theology departments at Moody Bible Institute, and a couple other schools prior to that. So I've been in this field for a good 30 years or more teaching, and perhaps another little aspect, grew up in Southern California.
Oh, where?
Well, several places, but the longest was Glendora, not far from Pasadena. And in the LA area. And I married my wife Jan 45 years ago. So good long run. And I guess it's going to stick. So, and we have 2 boys, Peter and Nathan.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So you just come back from Israel. Tell us about that.
Yes. Yeah, every few years when the students and possibly some other organization can get together, we do an Israel tour out of Houston Graduate School of Theology. It's an academically oriented tour, so it's seeing the archaeology sites. It's really seeing the lay of the land so that you get the context around the Bible. So it's not just following the footsteps of Jesus. Mm-hmm. We had a good group this time. I spent 10 days in Israel, very packed days, very full days. Spending about 4 or 5 miles of walking through sites each day, and then breaking it at the end of the day, either swimming in the Sea of Galilee or wandering around Old City Jerusalem. This was the 5th tour I've led, and so we get in all sorts of nooks and crannies of places that set up biblical Israel, as well as historical Israel, as well as address the current issues and the lay of the land as well. This year, we had a Jewish guide for most of the tour, which of course means that her sensitivities to get us into all those Jewish sites and to give us a really vivid aspect of and description of the places was very nice.
Tell us about some of those nook and crannies that she showed you.
Well, one of the sites that is just opened up is Magdala. I had not been to Magdala before because I think the last tour was about 5 years ago. Mexico was building a conference center, and with any sort of construction, once you hit an archaeological site, you got to stop. And we found that they actually uncovered the Magdala Synagogue, a site almost certainly that Jesus had been in. And one of the novel features of...
Now, when you say Magdala, explain
like in Mary Magdalene.
Oh, okay.
It's on the northwest coast of the Sea of Galilee, a couple miles north of Tiberias. And it had been a fairly heavily populated zone in the first centuries, BC and AD. And Mary Magdalene came out of that city somewhere. We don't know exactly where. One of the novel things of this synagogue is that in the archaeological ruins, they found a table where the scrolls would have been rolled out on, nicely carved with relief. And so that was an advance. We had never found that kind of table before. Right. Also in Magdala, There's a harbor that they have uncovered, and because there are salt springs in the Magdala area, it became a center point for salting fish. So it became one of the major industries that they did. If you were a fisherman anywhere in the Sea of Galilee and you couldn't sell your fish fresh, you would probably get involved with Magdala somehow, and they would provide the salting that would preserve fish, for later use. Because of course they did not have refrigeration.
Right.
Yeah, so that was one of the nooks that I'd never been in before.
Right.
There are other places that many tourists do not go to because they're just focused on Jesus. But places like Gamla, where again you've got an excellent synagogue. Gamla is itself on a ridge that looks like the back of a camel, and its name is Camel. Gamla means camel in Hebrew.
Okay.
And so we go there. It was one of the places that the Zealots especially tried to hold the Romans, and they were overrun, and the city was destroyed. But there are some nice ruins of BC, first century BC Jewish life, there in Gamla. Of course, there's plenty of places. I mean,
Right.
Every day is full of sites we go to.
So you said at first you had a Jewish guide.
Yeah, for all of the regular Israel sites, we had a Jewish guide who was an outstanding storyteller. Best guide I've had of all 5 tours. And we used to be able to take Jewish guides into the West Bank,
Right.
but that's closing. So every time we went into the West Bank, say for Samaria or for Bethlehem or Jericho, we had to give up the Jewish guide, and there was a Palestinian guide made available for us for those times. And so we got a different perspective of, one presented a more optimistic Jewish perspective, thought that the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem was a very good thing, and then the other gave a very different perspective, identifying that the moving of the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem says that U.S. does not care about the Palestinians because we've now taken sides. And because we're on the Jewish side now, we are not a middleman that can help work for peace.
Now, there are also Christians there in the...
Definitely.
Yeah.
And most of the Christians there in Israel, the ethnic Christians that are there in Israel are Palestinians, usually Orthodox. There are, of course, some other Christians who come from other ethnicities, Ethiopian or Coptic or Roman Catholic. But the main body of Christians in Israel are Palestinian Orthodox. Most Jews are not Christians. That is, very, very few Jews are Christians in Israel.
That's very interesting. Most of we hear here in the United States, it's the Jewish side.
Right.
And the support for them, and the Palestinian cause is not really lifted up in a favorable view. So what do you say about that? I mean, how do you navigate that as an American, as a Christian, and as a biblical scholar who understands the historical heritage? But you have a situation today. How do you relate those two?
Well, yeah, and that is a difficult feature to work. Obviously, we want to support Israel because a number of the countries around Israel are clearly, putting it at risk. But our primary concern should be the support of fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. And those are Palestinians. So our support for Israel in its growth and preservation should not be at the expense of the family of Christ. And so we need to be supporting them as well. Obviously, there was a time when there was the possibility of the two of them talking and possibly working something out. I don't have a clue as to how it's going to work from here. And we've forfeited the role of working between them. We've shown that by putting our cards on the table with the embassy, that the U.S. is on one side and not the other. So there really is no middleman now, and there isn't a particular group that probably on either side that we could work with to negotiate something that could bring them together. So, I mean, if we had done this movement of the embassy into Jerusalem like we did, a far more sensitive approach would have been to take the East Jerusalem consulate and then turn that into a Palestinian embassy simultaneously. Because that would then have said that we hear you, we see you, we know that there is a tension here, and we don't want to simply say Jerusalem is for the Jews. East Jerusalem has been normally Palestinian, and Jews are encroaching into it.
All right. I know when I was at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C., we regularly had delegations of Christians from Palestine, to visit us, and they always had a concern that they seem to be the invisible people.
Well, they are.
Nobody. We talk about the Jews, talk about the Arabics,
Right.
And we're a Christian nation, at least partially.
And we're not.
but that's how we are perceived oftentimes, even to ourselves, even though we know that's not totally the case. But still, it seems that we ought to have, especially the church, ought to have some kind of fidelity or some kind of concern about their fellow Christians there in the Middle East.
And because Houston Graduate School's a very eclectic community, we have had Palestinian students who are Orthodox and got their MDiv training for pastoring here in our graduate school, and of course they've graduated, so they're not there now. But when they were there, they brought that concern to our attention, which is good. A concern we already had, but it was nice to hear living Palestinians from Houston, bring that out.
That's fantastic. Well, tell me more about Houston Graduate School of Theology. Your experience there, and how taking students from there to Israel will impact how they view their own faith, but also how they view this culture and this political environment that we're in now.
Well, as you know, the Houston Graduate School of Theology is a very eclectic group, both on the faculty as well as the student population. And so one of the important things is to get people together from a variety of traditions so that they can see themselves and hear each other. See themselves so that they can get, in a graduate way, a greater depth of understanding about their own tradition. And so when I'm teaching in either biblical text or theology, I want to make sure that their traditions are evident in what we talk about in the class. And then to hear each other, so that we can see the diversity, really see a living proponent or exponent of a point of view, so that it's not just academic, so that it's lived out, and they can then converse with each other about those very things. Because our seminary is training pastors and counselors, it's a very practical-oriented approach, but such practice needs to have sufficient depth to appreciate that there's a heritage that they work with, a heritage in the theology or heritage from biblical passages which show that these gems have relevance for the practice as well. Now, so it's been a joy to be here for 9 years, working with students and on this faculty together with you, in those kind of emphases.
That's, Houston is being touted as the most diverse city, in the country, and there are people from every walk of life, from every nationality, speaking almost every language you can think of, here in Houston. And Houston Graduate School of Theology sits right in the middle of that.
Right.
And have all the different kinds of students. So how does that play out in the classroom, that
Sure.
diversity? Just mention, I talk about the beloved community here, and one of the tenets of the beloved community is that we all share a common memory.
Right.
In a common story. And that common memory and story gives us then the opportunity to have a common future.
Well, the only way you can get a common memory
Uh-huh.
is to hear each other.
Okay.
And so that it becomes part of that heard testimony in which we can own and say, I can relate to that, or grieve over the fact that I may have been part of the problem, or think about in practical ways how we could go forward to address those kind of concerns. I mean, the only way you can firm up a community is if the community is conversing, the community is loving, the community is there for each other in real practical ways.
But also they have a common text,
Well, yes.
a common narrative that they're all trying to live into together. It's the biblical narrative.
Well, that does draw us in, and we are clearly committed to the biblical text. I mean, I have the unique privilege of
Yes.
teaching a lot of the
Exactly,
Bible
exactly,
classes.
exactly.
And so we're trying to bring that common biblical text so that we can engage it. But there's a context around that biblical text, which is what say the Israel Tour and
Right, exactly.
other courses are trying to do. That biblical text can be understood in real precision, which is what I'm doing with my third semester Greek students now and my fourth semester Hebrew students in the fall, to engage them on a real precise reading of that text. But those texts then engage in a context here, and our context, though Houston, may be not the same, may have some diversity. That is, in the same way as different people in Houston may have different kind of tastes of food. Our context might be a bit different. My son just had his birthday, and his friends did a shrimp boil for him, and so we dumped it out on the table and all and imbibed the potatoes and the shrimp and the sauce. I mean, that's a certain flavor that's present in Houston. And my other son and I like to take in good barbecue, and that's a different flavor of Houston. And my wife really enjoys Mediterranean restaurants, and there's a different flavor of Houston. And so only those...
One family.
Yeah, one family. So the family gets together and brings these different flavors. At the school, we have to come together with the different flavors that we bring and try to understand each other from those vantage points.
Now, you've been there for 9 years now. I'm sure you have alumni that come back, and talk to you every now and again.
Sure do.
How does that buffet that they experience in the classroom help to impact their work and their ministry as they go forth, either in chaplaincy, or counseling, or pastoring?
Well, it does in many ways, because yes, you're right that not only from Houston Graduate School, but from other schools. I mean, we've been in this long enough so that some of my students are now profs at various schools, and they're contributing.
I have about 6 or 7 of them.
That's right. That's right. And occasionally one of them becomes a colleague at the same school as I am. Not here at Houston Graduate School yet, but elsewhere that's happened. So that's a joy to see the next generation pick up the same kind of charge and passion for what we're doing. The fact that that Houston Graduate School has a strong MDiv and MTS program for ministry and the academics, as well as a strong counseling program, means that some of our students and some of our grads have put them both together. And if they're going in the VA or ministering to our veterans, that combination is especially helpful because that means they can be both a counselor and a chaplain on location, which, because they've got the training for both. And several have come back for that. That has come back and let us know that we prepared them well for those kind of ministries. And of course, some of them are pastoring,
Yes.
and we occasionally get into their churches and see and sample what their church is about as well, and that's delightful.
One of the things I found about Houston Graduate School of Theology, I get the true of many seminaries now, is many of the folks who are coming in are not just fresh out of college, but many of them had long careers,
Right.
Already, and now are accepting the call, to ministry, or
That's
have been
true.
in ministry for a while, decided that they want to come back for further education.
Right.
How have you seen that over the years, and
Yeah.
how has it expressed itself at Houston?
Well, when I was at Moody, I taught in the graduate school, and that same quality was happening there. In other schools, it's just fresh out of high school. But at Houston Graduate School, we've got some that are fresh out of college because we're at a grad program, and they are heading in a trajectory that was clear and continuing in the direction in which they had been going, and we can lay the foundation for them. But many of our students, probably the majority of our students, have already had a substantial career or are currently doing a career, such as teaching, and finding that adding a master's might increase their pay in teaching, but will also make them usable in a greater way in their church. And so we help equip them, and they already have some sense of what they really want. They have tried out a career. They've seen that they want to be there for people in practical ways, and so they're shifting that focus so that the rest of their life might be more meaningful in a practical way for meeting real needs in a variety of ways, chaplaincy or pastoring or counseling or whatever. And so it's good that as a school we can be there for them, to help them in that shift, help them get the official certifications, because we're fully certified the state for the counseling, and we've got a accredited MDiv program for pastoring, and then give them what it takes to be there for people in practical ways that will bring benefit and growth and success in ministry.
You're not only a accomplished and experienced educator, but you're also an author. How many books have you written?
10.
10 books.
Yeah, 10 books. So it's been a while working on these 10 books, but
Well, tell me about some of that, because every time I see you, you're in your office working.
right.
Yeah.
Well, probably the first breakout book that got some notice was a book that I co-authored with a prof from Wichita, Marv Pate, Deliverance Now and Not Yet. It was acclaimed by some specialists to be the best single volume on tribulation, as we explored how the Christian was in some way already delivered, but in some way still in tension of suffering on before kingdom in its final form. So that was probably first breakout book. It's the one that I know has sold the most. And I wrote a book on Messiah Jesus, where in the 1980s, there was a shift in the theological field to appreciate a more Jewish sense of Jesus. That is, throughout the 20th century, Jesus began to be presented from the dominant culture point of view. The Nazis tended to remove the Jewishness from Jesus. The white church in America sent people off to the First World War and Second World War with a very white-looking Jesus picture in their pockets. The Sunday school literature presents a very white Jesus. And it's important not to rescue Jesus from that white culture to a Oriental or to a black or to whatever minority group. It's important to rescue him to where he actually was. An ethnically Jewish Jesus, a minority, an oppressed minority by the Romans in that day. And also because he was somewhat novel in his message, oppressed by some of the Jewish leadership too. So Messiah Jesus really unpacks Jesus from that vantage point and gives us a very rabbinically engaged Jesus, that is there for people and unusual in miraculous ability.
So you have a new book that's out now called The Gospel.
Yes.
Which you want to talk about it, in our next section. You want to just say a brief word? What's this about?
Yes. The church all grants that there is a gospel, and the gospel is, of course, the message for salvation. The church, however, has held different points of view about what that message is. It's important for us to biblically ground that. This book looks at the biblical grounding of that gospel message.
And that's what we're going to look at in our next segment. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for joining us on Bright Spots.